welcome to a special live streaming from Wuxi, a beautiful city in South China's Jiangsu province, which is also my home province. And we're in this beautiful film studio. It's called the Wuxi National Digital Film Industrial Park, where a lot of Chinese movies are actually made here, believe it or not. Anyway, my name is Lu Xin. It's a great pleasure to be here with you from Wuxi. This city is actually quite amazing, and I'm just discovering it for the very first time. For instance, one of the things I've heard for the first time about the city is that this is the city with the highest per capita GDP among large and medium-sized cities in China. Can you imagine that? Anyway, and this city, believe it or not, is also on the very first front of high-tech development in China. We heard about the US blockade of Chinese chip industry, for instance, actually here. This city is on the forefront of that. But today, we are going to talk about something much softer. It's about beauty, it's about human emotions, it's about fashion, it's about literature, about history, about art. We're talking about silk, because silk is one of the traditional industries that is very strong here in Wuxi. Actually, ancient China, as we all know, was known to be the land of silk, because that is why also China was given the name Ceres, right? And research shows that sericulture in China dates back almost 7,000 years. That is about 5,000 years before sericulture or related industries were brought to the West. So today we're going to talk about all of that in this 1-hour special forum, live streaming, coming to you from Wuxi. Without much ado, let's meet our guests and take a look at this video first. Who are our guests today? Let's take a look.
Wang Renwei, Executive Dean of Fudan Institute for Belt and Road and Global Governance. Hu Meixin, General Secretary of Academic Committee of Silk Road Culture Study, Institute of Silk Road Culture and International Sinology, Zhejiang Normal University. Adriano Madaro, Italian journalist and sinologist. Ning Qiang, Professor of Art History and Art Communication in Beijing Foreign Studies University. Alessandro Golombowski Teixeira, former Brazilian Minister of Tourism. Yanis Varoufakis, Mirror 25, leader and former Finance Minister of Greece. Raja Dato Nusirwan Zainal Abidin, Ambassador of Malaysia to China.
All right, so I have actually, before we go into the discussion, I have a table in front of you, and I'm sure people are wondering what are on the table. So let's talk about it first. Professor Hu,
yeah.
I understand some of the objects were brought by you. Can you help us understand what some of these are?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to share this with you and friends online and friends from afar, the international friends. This is, if you guess what this might be.
Okay, let's guess what this might be. I hope my friends online can figure out what this is. It looks like a round but flat object. Sorry?
Yes, a purse.
Purse.
A purse.
A good guess.
Okay, that's a good guess.
A very
Any
good
other
guess.
guess? It does look like a purse. Look, I can carry it like this. Any other guess? No? Nobody's courageous enough. Why don't you unveil the answer for us?
Yes, I guess this might be a purse, might be a handbag, but this time it's a tea bag.
It's a tea bag.
I'd like to share something inside this tea bag. We can see what inside is tea.
Tea. Okay.
So in ancient China, tea and silk always go together.
Okay.
Yes. So this is a very typical Chinese tea, and we put this into this silk bag to
Carry it around.
Yes, carry it around with you when you travel. And if you go outside for a picnic with your friends, you take this with you, easy to carry. And the fabric, silk, and the pattern used to be used for emperors or kings with these waves for the robe of the kings. But today it's for ordinary people's life.
For everybody, for
Yes.
me as well, and I can use it as a purse,
Sure,
if I want
sure,
to.
sure.
Okay, so this is lovely. This is lovely, and it's very practical. Besides silk and tea,
Yes.
we have something that is very special from Wuxi. I understand. I have to show these. I don't know whether my guests are able to see these clearly. Do you see these? These
Yes,
are
yes.
lovely clay dolls. Also tell us a little bit, because Wuxi is famous for clay dolls,
Yes,
right? And these are
yes.
hand-painted. Any special point you want to mention here about them?
It looks very happy. And as I know, this is known as Afu,
Afu, okay.
meaning happiness, and good
Happiness.
luck.
Happiness and good luck. And clay, made of clay,
Yes,
which is,
yes, yes.
there are a lot of clay pots,
Yes,
clay,
yes,
clay teapots
yes,
that are very famous here. And, of course, I'm going to show them these. These are silk fabrics, but we're going to talk about it in just a moment, okay? We have some silk here on display, and we will tell the story behind them. So, as I mentioned earlier, our show is being streamed live on our phone. So if you are not, if you don't have the CGTN application, try to download it. This is going on here. I would like to hear comments, and I understand already 16 thumbs up. So please give us more thumbs up.
Wow.
Potentially, we can have some prizes, more thumbs up for Lucien and for all our guests, please. Yes, this is going out live on Weibo, on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, all over the world. So I think this is one of the first shows that we're talking about silk, talking about the city of Wuxi. Now, I have asked my guests to prepare for this show, of course, and I'm going to ask my guests to talk about silk and in their specific cultural context. We are going to be fair and democratic. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to follow the alphabetical order of the names of the country of my guests instead of official ranking. So in that case, guess who is going first? Professor Teixeira, you're going first. Yeah, you're lucky.
Thank you.
Yes, so tell us about silk in your country. I just did a little bit of research, and I was surprised that actually silk is very important for Brazil, and very high quality silk as well. For instance, the scarf maker Hermès is actually sourcing, as I understand, sourcing its silk from Brazil. Tell us about your understanding of the story. Yeah.
Yes, Brazil, fortunately enough, I come from the fashion industry. So my grandfather and my father owns for many decades an apparel company. So we are the largest producer of women and men clothes in Brazil, more suits and things like that. So silk, it comes from a long time, but in fact, if we analyze where it comes from China, right? So just to remember very quickly that when the Europeans, the Spaniards and the Portuguese and the Italians also, they arrived in the Americas, they were trying to go around the Turkish area, in the empire, the Ottoman Empire, to do trade, and they took the opposite route. So since that time when we say that we are being discovered from Europeans, they want to go back to what we call the spice island and the spice area that was China and India to do trade exactly with silk. So the silk arrived in Brazil with the Europeans bringing from China directly. So since that, our textile industry is one of the oldest in the Americas, and we do have quite a strong production in silk. Not only Hermès, but we have other French brands like Louis Vuitton that outsource production in Brazil. So, but again, a very important point, we start our textile industry based on Europe and based on China.
Can I ask you, how is silk pronounced in Portuguese?
Very similar, called seda. Seda.
Seda?
Seda.
Seda.
Yes.
And where does that come from? Do you have any idea?
From Latin. It comes from Latin word. Yeah.
Latin.
Comes from Latin word. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Very interesting. Silda. So, yeah, I'm learning something. Professor Huang, where do you think possibly this word comes from? Because it sounds very similar. Because in Chinese, silk is si, right? Yeah. So, is there a possible link between si and silda?
Yeah, I think so. Because Latin language originally from older Roman Empire. Older Roman Empire is the termination of Silk Road in the west side. So they imported silk from east side from China, and after all, they use the words from Chinese silk to silda. So I think they are related.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Yes, Professor Teixeira?
Yes, I think it's right, yeah. Comes from Europe to Brazil, to the Latin-speaking countries, and we're going to see that it's very similar to Spanish as well.
Yeah. All right. In alphabetical order, let me go to Yanis. Mr. Yanis Varoufakis, who is Mira 25 leader, which is a political movement, a political party, and former finance minister of Greece. He's joining us from Athens. So I had done a little bit of research, and I was told that Greek historian Pausanias was among the first to correctly point out in the 2nd century that silk is not a vegetal fiber, but comes from an insect. Before that, people in the West thought that silk came from a plant, originating from a distant country called Ceres, that is China. So, according to your knowledge, when did ancient Greeks first set sight on silk?
Much earlier than that. It was in the 9th century BC.
9th century BC?
Yes.
That is 900 earlier, yeah, 900 years earlier.
3,000 years.
Silk had arrived in what is today the western part of Turkey, which was part of the Greek world back then. So the Greeks living on the coast of the Aegean in Turkey, and let me remind you that the very well-known ancient Greek poet Homer, who wrote the Odyssey and the Iliad, lived in that part. They knew of silk because silk had arrived through the ancient Silk Road from China. And the only reason why I'm participating in today's show, because I'm an economist and politician and I know very little about silk and fabrics, is because I'm one of those people here in Europe mightily concerned by developments over the last few years. The Silk Road, which united or brought together Europe and China, more than 2,500 years ago, is today paved with landmines and a new Cold War, which is brooding and breeding and gathering pace between the West and China. So if you allow me, I want to make a political statement. It is the duty of all of us here in Europe, in the United States, in China, to do our utmost to make sure that we are connected through beauty, through silk, through literature, through music, and that we do whatever it takes to kill this Cold War, this new Cold War that began with President Trump and which is now being escalated by President Biden, to kill it in its tracks, to make sure that it does not continue, to ensure that there is never war in the South China Seas that spills over to the rest of the world. So I apologize for taking you from silk to war, but it is essential for the future of humanity that this thread, cloth thread, silk thread, whatever thread you want to imagine, that links China with the West is not interrupted, was not broken by a war that will signal the end of humanity. You know, I might be accused of over-dramatizing, but I don't believe I am. So we need to end all notions of war in Taiwan, in the South China Seas, in Ukraine, in Europe, across the world, and we need to work very hard in order to ensure that the new Cold War does not actually become a thermonuclear one.
Thank you very much, Mr. Varoufakis. Of course, we meant for this program to be about culture, to be about history, about people-to-people exchange. But since you went straight into politics, I think there is a point there, and actually you made a good point. Because the reason why we want to talk about silk is not because we want to talk about this industry, is we want to talk about communication. We want to talk about understanding and friendship, and how for millennia, human beings have tried to communicate with each other and learn from each other, and that's how we come this far. So I do not blame you for going into politics straight away, but let's come back still to the topic, to the subtopic of silk. And I'm going to go to my guest here, Professor Hu, again here, because you come from Zhejiang Normal University. You are General Secretary of the Academic Committee of Silk Road Culture Study of the Institute of Silk Road Culture and International Sinology. Help us understand why, for thousands of years ago, people came all the way to China to look for that thing. What about it that was so special, and how it shaped the world today? It's a big question, I know.
It's a big question, but it's a very important question as well. Silk Road has been a very important symbol of the communication and learning from each other between China or East and the West. So why people have been coming to China to seek this beauty, I guess it's the topic we talk, beauty and harmony, both are being sought by the world. So people came to China firstly to seek silk, and then in this seeking process, they found friendship, mutual understanding, and also they found, well, we have a lot to share with each other. So they found the growth of both sides in this process. And I guess that's the very core of the purpose of people coming to China, for silk, for beauty, and for harmony.
Well, tell us a little bit why this particular region is so famous for silk. I mean, not just Jiangsu, but neighboring Zhejiang province as well. What about this place that produced the most delicate silk that is known to the world?
Well, this part of China has been known as the land of silk. And it's with a suitable weather to plant the, as mentioned here, people believe it's on some plants, but the worm does eat some plants, some leaves from the tree, mulberry tree.
Mulberry trees.
Yeah, and this area is with a nice weather to plant these sort of plants. And then silkworms, a lot of silkworms can be found here. So in the early period, people started to produce silk with these natural resources from the nature. So I believe in this part of China, people found the unity between nature and human, because it's totally a natural resources. And then people get into the resource at the right time before the worm came out from the cocoon. If it's too late, the cocoon is destroyed, and the silk cannot be made. Yeah. So it requires wisdom from human side to make the best use of the nature. So
do we know since when, how early was silk produced in this area? Do we know?
I believe it's 1,000 years ago, because according to some archaeology experts, we found the silk in some sites 5,000 years ago.
At least 5,000 years ago.
At least 5 years in Zhejiang province.
In Zhejiang province.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me go to our Italian guest, because Italy have been, of course, the ancient Roman civilization has been extremely important, the other end of the Silk Roads. And we have very famous people talking about the mysterious East, right? Marco Polo, for instance. And I found this. Okay, let me go to my Italian guest, a journalist and sinologist, Adriano Madaro, who is an Italian journalist and sinologist, as I said. And this from the ancient Roman poet Virgil in the 1st century BC. And it says, of Ethiop forests whole with downy wool, or how the Ceres comb from off the leaves their silky fleece. Mr. Madaro, you have done a lot of cultural exchanges with China regarding China. What is silk to you, and how do you tell the local people the story about silk?
It is really very interesting, this connection between China and Italy for silk. Already, also Varoufakis mentioned the interest of ancient Rome, the interest of ancient Rome towards the silk. The Romans, they didn't understand what was exactly this product. They think something coming from some leaves of trees, some herbs, or from some animals to cut, like the wool or something like this. But they really are very interested to have this special, particular product in the Roman market. So we can say 2 centuries BC, Rome already know many information about the silk, but can't go from Rome to China. Why? Because the Silk Road was interrupted and cut from the Persian Empire. So Rome fight several wars against the Persian to have opened this road towards China, but it never was possible. Also, Rome was defeated from the Persian in the Carre War in the year 53 BC. So the 2 empires, they have never opportunity to have a meeting, to have some information more deep. For China, not for China, for Italy, for Rome, China was the country of the Seri. Seri, from this word comes after silk. The Seri was one people that they think is so far east in China that have this product, very famous for silk. So Rome was very interested to have a business and market with China, but when they arrive in the border with Persia, in that moment, Persia forbidden to go on because they won't have the exclusive market of silk. And also Tiberius, the Emperor Tiberius, he forbidden the market, the commerce of silk in Rome because the cost was so high for Rome. The cost of silk in that moment in the Roman market was 1 kilogram of silk is 1 kilogram of gold. Is the same. To have silk or to have gold was the same. So very important market. Also, the toga, we say that special dressing of the senators of Roma Senato, they wear of silk. Is a red color from Arabia, because in that moment it was so difficult to go through the Silk Road, was interrupted by the Persian, so they used through Arabia, from the Arabs. And in Italy, silk is really considered also today a very important product, and is the name of China. When you speak about the silk, immediately you have the image of China. We know because I organized 4 very great exhibitions in Italy devoted to the Silk Road and the Chinese civilization. And I have been in several archaeological sites in China to see the excavation, especially in Xinjiang. There we found the silk of 12th centuries BC. Is so far. It means the silk was really one of the first products of China, so particular that all the world known in that moment won't have this particular special product. So important to make the civilization also in Europe. It's very important. Now I am speaking to you from 25 kilometers from Marco Polo home.
Yeah?
Because, Marco Polo house is 25 kilometers from my house, where I am speaking now. So Marco Polo was also so important to introduce China, the great of China, of this big empire, through his famous book, Il Milione. You know, all the world know. One of the first, really, the first relation about China of that moment, the Yuan Empire, with so important connection through the Silk Road with the Mediterranean, through the Mediterranean till Bambalik.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed, a lot can be said about silk, about the connection between China, silk, and ancient Rome or Italy now. We'll talk about modern silk industry in just a moment. Let me go to Chinese Professor Ning Qiang, because we're doing one foreign guest, one Chinese guest, as you may have noticed. Professor Ning Qiang, you are from Foreign Studies, Beijing Foreign Studies University, Professor of Art History and Art Communication. Why do we talk about silk roads, not tea roads, or or China roads, you know, porcelain? I mean, why do we talk about Silk Road?
Well, because the Silk Road, I think, is an exchange that took place among people along the Silk Road between the East and the West and the Middle. So it's mostly take place among the people, or we say between the people. So I think this is a very important part to emphasize. I can cite a good example for you. I find a painting in the Dunhuang Caves, which dated to the 6th century, showing a Western traveler carry his goods to China, and he got sick, lying down on the ground, dying. And the local villagers, Chinese, they took care of him. Men and women just used a long spoon to cook Chinese traditional medicine and feed him, and he recovered from the sickness. So I think it is the friendship has long established between the people, between the East and the West and the Middle, right? We cannot simplify it as the East and the West, but also include people in Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, and in the middle. I think the Italian professor already mentioned it, right? Mostly people in the middle played the middleman to carry Chinese or deliver the Chinese goods to the West, and the Western goods also carried by them to China. Of course, the direct connection has been established as well.
Professor Ning, Professor
Yes.
Ning, let me interrupt you here. This is interesting because we hear the Silk Roads, but you just now talk about Western or things from Western regions, Western civilizations to China, also coming into China, but we don't hear about these roads. For instance, we don't hear about... Of
course.
Do we?
A lot of, golden ware, like golden cup and glassware, were actually made in the West. Some made probably in Greece or in Rome, and some in, say, what we call now the West Asia, right?
But
And
we don't
maybe-
hear
but-
about. But we don't hear about these roads. We only hear this one-way Silk Roads. Why?
Silk Road is a double way or a dual way or multiple direction way. It's a network connects the East and the West, and particularly people live in the middle. So we don't say just the Chinese culture spread to the West. It's not that way, okay? The Silk Road is a way of commerce and also a way of cultural exchange, including material culture. This is why I cite this painting showing how hard, how difficult of this road used to be, right? And then you have people come and blocked or robbed by bandits, and some of them by Chinese bandits, right? And also, of course, Chinese merchants travel to the West. They were blocked and robbed by bandits as well. All these interesting things actually were painted on the wall in the Dunhuang caves. So, and particularly, I want to mention an archaeological discovery, a blackboard on which you see the story of how Chinese silkworm eggs were actually carried to the West. So that reminded me the new situation here, right? You brought the technology of chips to China, and in that time, like in the Han Dynasty, and also the
Han
Chinese
Dynasty,
government
which is
tried to stop.
Yeah, which is about 2,000 years ago. Yeah.
Yes,
So China
about
was
2,000 years
blocking.
ago.
China was
They're trying
blocking.
to block the technology of recent, not the recent, but mulberry tree planting and silk making technology to be carried out to the West or outside Chinese border. So what I'm trying to say is it happens all the time in history and in present time. The Silk Road is a symbol of global friendship, global exchange, but also a symbol of humanity. People want to enjoy the technological development, but in the same time, you also say the so-called national interests or commercial interests, what we would define it. So it's a complicated, it's not just harmony or beauty.
I'm sure.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not just about harmony. Yeah.
It is beauty and it is harmony, but it is also conflict, interest conflict.
Yeah. Actually,
I think it's interesting.
Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt you there. You remind me of my conversation yesterday with my daughter, because I asked her, what questions would you be interested if we talk about silk? She was like, what about conflicts? How did people, when they didn't understand each other, when they couldn't speak the language, when they come from thousands of miles away, they must have conflicts. What about those? You know, maybe we
Great story, yeah.
Maybe we can talk about that in just a moment. But let me go to our Malaysian guest, Ambassador Nushirwan. You have been listening very attentively. So, of course, Malaysia is on the other side of China instead of going west from China. But I'm sure silk was introduced, if I understand correctly, it was introduced at some point to Southeast Asia through the maritime route, right? And then to Southern Asia, to Eastern Africa, and through that route to Europe as well. Tell us a bit about your understanding of silk and what kind of cultural linkage exists between China and Malaysia in the silk context.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here for the first time. And thank you to my fellow panelists as well for the very interesting things that they said, learned a lot. You know, civilization in what is now known as Malaysia began about 2,500 years ago. And it's not very well known. It's a place called the Bujang Valley. It's north to the peninsula of Malaysia. And even there, excavation works have shown that there were materials from China, porcelain, obviously, glassware, beads, and things like that. I suspect that silk is part of that, of those products existing there. It's just a question of silk being much more perishable and therefore not having lasting power given the climate in Southeast Asia. But I just also want to underline that we have had an unbroken relationship with China based on trade for as long as we've existed. And the pattern of trade is silks and porcelain from China and spices from Southeast Asia, especially maritime Southeast Asia. And this is a fact which is very well recorded by Chinese historians going back at least to the 5th century AD. And this is a pattern which is repeating itself. History comes in waves. Now, for the past 2 years, Southeast Asia and China, we are back to being each other's largest trading partner. So this is a fact of history. It just goes to show the intimacy between China and Southeast Asia.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
And Southeast Asia's relationship with China is not only in terms of the exchange of products, but we have been very lucky that we have the monsoons. So which means that it's very predictable. For 6 months of the year, the winds blow in a certain direction. Other 6 months of the year, it goes back in a different direction. So that has meant that Chinese traders have always come to Southeast Asia to trade with India, with Hadramaut in Yemen, and straight to Europe via that way for thousands of years. So, so you asked the question about how important silk is to our relationship. I would say that silk and spices are the basis of our historical relationship between, at least maritime Southeast Asia and China, because people often forget that in maritime Southeast Asia, it is the sea that unites us, not land, because it was much easier to travel by sea rather than by land.
How interesting. I wanted to ask you, how is silk pronounced in your language or languages, if you can share with us, Ambassador?
I think it's quite ironic because silk in the Malay language is sutra, which is from Sanskrit. It's not Chinese in origin.
Okay.
It's actually Indian in origin, and there is a very simple explanation for it. As I mentioned, that economic relationship between China and maritime Southeast Asia has existed for a long time. But in civilizational terms, Southeast Asia has been much more influenced by India. So in very many ways, you scratch the surface of culture in Southeast Asia, and you will see something from India. Ditto the word silk in Malay, which is sutra, which I think is Sanskrit in origin and therefore from India.
Tell me again, say it again. How do you pronounce it?
It's sutra.
Sutra.
Yes, exactly. Well done.
Sutra. Okay, you want to try?
Beautiful. Sutra.
I can sue you, Guan.
So it's you believe it's coming from Sanskrit, or is it established that it is from Sanskrit, Ambassador?
Yes.
It is from Sanskrit.
Yes. I think it's most likely from Sanskrit, like very many words in the Malay language.
Okay. But again, it's very similar to the Chinese si, right? Professor Huang, I'm coming back to you all the time. Was it possible that silk first went to India?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then from India
To Southeast Asia.
to Southeast Asia. Tell us a bit more about that. Yeah, how important is silk in the way we understand the world? Because right? For thousands of years ago, people believed the earth was flat. There was the east, there was the west. And silk was traveling, across this vast land. Then, at some point, people believe, oh, it's a globe. Help us understand how important was silk a driving factor in that?
Firstly, the Silk Road in the reality is much longer than in the words. The Silk Road can be found about 7,000 to 8,000 years ago from the
archaeological studies. Okay.
Recently, my colleagues found many historical sites in Central Asia and Western Asia. We can find the silk about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it's much longer than the words, not only 2,000 or 3,000 years. This is one thing. And the second, we can find it changed the culture, the life in west part of Europe, such as you can see the sculpture in Greece, almost naked.
Almost naked, you mean?
Naked. But in old Roma, it's changed.
Mr. Madaro, I'm going to ask you about that, okay?
In old Roma, people put on clothes.
Yeah.
That clothes, mostly silk.
Senator.
Mostly silk.
Okay, that's after silk was introduced.
Yeah, only after about BC 100 years. So it's very different from Greece to Roma. And this, we also found Silk Road is not only silk. It's transferred Chinese technology in the 13 to 14,000 century.
13 to 14th century, you mean?
Yeah. China's four greatest technology export to Europe.
Through the Silk Road.
Through the Silk Road. That is printing, paper making, and gunpowder, and compass. These four technologies moved to West Europe, changed Europe fundamentally.
Okay.
From that, Europe people want more wealthy from East, and happened the so-called Crusade War between Europe.
The Crusade.
Between Europe and Ottoman Turkey. But you see, the fighting mostly, substantially for the Silk Road.
For silk or
for the Silk Road.
For the Silk Road.
To control this.
To control
the way of commerce.
Okay.
But the Silk Road broken by this war. So Europe people try to find another direction to the west to find the east. Suddenly they found a new continent, not old China. So the global was found, it is round like a ball.
Like a globe, yeah.
Like a ball. Okay. So Silk Road broken, but the world connected.
Okay, Mr. Madaro, you were making a comment. Do you want to say something? Did you want to say something?
Yes, I agree totally with what you said before about this history. And we can say this. A Roman Empire beginning to defeat against the Persian Empire only for the reason that they can't go to China directly. Because for Rome it was very important to go to see this country of the Seri people that produce the silk. But it's like one big organization in the Central Asia that doesn't permit to cross the Silk Road for the length from Rome to Chang'an, from Rome to Kambalik during the Marco Polo time. It was so difficult. If it's only for the commerce, for the trade, also China needs some particular products from Rome, like the glass and some products like from agriculture. In fact, we have also many connections between the Mediterranean and China during the Han and West and East Han dynasty. During these 400 years, we have very, very important. But the Persian was so, how to say, so strong, and Rome was defeated. From that moment, it became just to finish the role of Rome in the Mediterranean. But silk was the main point, the main product for Rome, because all people, rich people, also for political people, they dress with silk. But they didn't know that it was one worm that gave this particular product. They think it is from some herb, some tree, or some other animal.
Okay. Yeah, all right. I guess we have talked a lot about history. I don't think everybody shares that kind of passion for history. I do have another guest, and I'm going to invite him on board to talk a bit more about silk per se as we know it. So I'm going to invite Professor Ying Jie from Jiangnan University. Professor Ying, please join us here, please. Let's take a look at some silk, and you have brought some silk samples, I understand. Tell us a bit how special these are. 殷老师您好，您是来自江南大学的，给我们大家讲讲啊，这些丝有多么的不一样吧，好吗 ？How special this is？
好的啊，那我就来给大家讲一下啊，我们现在的这个丝绸的发展的一个最新技术。
我可以拿吗？
可以，一个最新的一个技术啊。其实针丝啊，虽然我们有几千的历史了，那么在现在这个时间啊，我们呢对这个针丝的提升有下面几个方面啊。
Can I use it like this？ 可以这样披着吗
？Yeah, sure.
好，您接着说。
一方面来说，就是说针丝它的触感啊是非常好，颜色啊非常的就是鲜亮、雍容华贵。那么我们的技术来说的话呢，如何能让它的这种优点啊得以最大化的一个保留啊，这是我们的研究点之一。
就是它的雍容华贵和丝滑这种感觉，
触感啊，
触感。
对。
什么哪个触字？
接触的触。
啊，触感。我以为是吃的那个醋。
Yeah.
All right. So basically, what Professor Ying is saying that what they're trying to do is to keep the special feel of silk as much as possible, right? The way how it feels, that's very silky. But what is the challenge? 但是这个过程中很难的是什么？
很难在于什么呢？如果是我们想把它的一个属性提高的同时呢，有可能会带来另外一种优点的丧失。
是什么？
比如说，我们想把它的一个就贴肤性啊，就是接触皮肤性能提升的时候呢，有可能会破坏它的一个颜色的一个就光亮性。
Okay, so the challenge is to keep the fine balance between the feel and the color, the vividness of the color. Okay, so 那你们怎么做呢？
这个时候呢，我们在对它的一个就是前处理工艺，包括我们在进行它的一个染色的时候呢，包括它的工艺，包括它的染料相关的一个优化，包括遴选，包括研发，我们做了一个大量的一个工作。
现在能做到这种两方面最佳的平衡吗 ？Can you strike a balance yet？
我们认为现在来说的话呢，我们所呈现出来的面料基本上能满足我们的对它的一个高性能的一个需求，也是很多高端服装面料他们就是说看上的这一点，就是说能满足他们的需要。
So he believes, Professor Ying believes that they have successfully met this challenge and they're able to meet the need of high quality fabrics. I'm going to ask you this question. 如果把中国无锡现在的丝绸面料和国际上最先进的丝绸面料做一个比较的话，我们在什么位置 ？If we are going to compete with the best quality silk in the world, where are we？ 说实话。
OK
这是一个很难回答的问题吗
？It's very difficult.
It's very difficult.
但是呢，我们可以说什么呢？我们的面料是不次于它，可以这么对，可以它是 neck to neck， 就是
neck to neck。
Yeah，
OK，
我们可以这么说来说。
What are they strong in？ 国外的面料他们强在哪里？
其实，在针织啊，尤其在欧洲啊，在欧洲国家啊，他们从前期它那个丝的一个原料，包括他们的一个就是设备啊等等方面的，包括一些工艺啊等等的话，他们也有大概有100多年的一种就是说快速的一个发展啊。所以这一点的话呢，就是说从近代来说的话呢，是超过了我们一些的。但是呢，我们最近啊也是在马不停蹄的在
奋力追赶。
对。虽然我们已经领先了几千年，但是呢，有点小插曲。
Okay, so this is a fascinating story. Yeah, so what Professor Ng is saying that for thousands of years, China was leading in silk production in the world, but over the past 100 or so years, Western countries actually caught up and surpassed right, the development of Chinese silk because of all kinds of factors, industrial advances, all of those. So right now, China is trying to catch up. Okay, what a story. I understand you also have a video to show one of the things you're trying to do to catch up, 是吧？因为我们要赶超嘛，所以我们要用最新的科技，在各种方面用最新的科技。你们学校，我听说有一种尝试，就是用最新的智能的方式，来在这个可能不是在丝绸的制作上，那么在丝绸的展现上也有一个尝试，能不能给我们展示一下？
可以的，我们有一个小视频。
好，我们一起来看一下。Let's take a look at this video of some of their innovation work.
机器人，人工智能，
好漂亮！这些是您的学生设计的吗？Are these the students' work or？
是我们一个团队来设计的。
OK，
对对。
哎，这些不是真人是吧？
都不是真人，是我们通过。
对，跟我们讲讲这故事。
其实呢，我们在开发的是一种高端的一种类似于真丝旗袍类似的一种定制平台。这种定制平台的话呢，他们是可以打破我们时空的，打破一种虚拟跟现实的一种限制，然后呢，就是说把我们想要的、想看的，通过一个就是视频的方式，通过一个虚拟的方式呈现在你的面前。
那我要是想试一试不同样的旗袍，我就可以。你们可以做一个3D 的模型，然后我就在里面走，是吗？
对，是可以的。我们是这样来的啊，比如说您这边要定制一件就是旗袍，我们这个时候呢，通过它的一个花型，通过它的款式，你来选。选完以后呢，我们是可以马上通过3维成模，通过服装元宇宙的方式把它呈现出来，把它的你最关心的一种触感，包括纹理等等相关的一些参数啊，就是说让你感知，让你知道这一点。包括它的细节，包括什么呢？很多时候我们展示是一种静态的，它这个时候呢是一种一种走动可以呢就是来模仿您这边的一种常用的一些动作。
OK， 我就知道了，在疫情期间这个很好，是吧？
是的，而且可以打破就是时空的限制。
可以打。So the idea is to use digital technology. I don't know the term. Yeah. However, to use meta 叫元宇宙 metaverse technology. Yeah. So that people not only know the design, but they can understand the feel, the details, and everything. It's in order to give people a better understanding.
是的，同时呢，我们呢就是说，在这个技术的同时，我们呢就开发出了智能的量体衣。这件衣服呢，在您边穿上去之后呢，您的尺寸可以达到一个最精准的采集。采集完之后，我们通过面料的快速的 生产加工下单，马上是单件的生产，生产之后呢，单件的一个，因为你的尺寸有了，单件量体成衣，速度非常快。
从电脑上就下来。
So you can use, you can design and produce a qipao perfectly customized to the person. What about the old masters? Are they going to lose their jobs? 那么那些旗袍师傅是不是就失业了呀？开个玩笑。
也不能失业啊，
也不能失业
就是说最起码我们不需要来量，量的话需要你到现场。我们这个呢，
不需要到现场。
不要到现场，你只要穿一下我的衣服，你的尺寸是就是一种毫米级的一种精度啊，就可以把它做出来。做出来之后，那么这件衣服一旦做出来了，是最适合你的一个人体尺寸。
下次我去试一试。
欢迎。
好，谢谢尹教授，谢谢。好的，谢谢。Wow, so basically what he's saying that using new technology, they're able to produce qipao in a much better, how should I say, value-added way.
Yes.
Yeah, this is amazing. I mean, unimaginable technology. I hope China will shine again, right, with the advent of intelligent technology. Professor Teixeira, it's been a while since you last spoke. Help us a little bit with your reaction so far. For instance, some of the things that you found interesting to react, and about the kind of competition that's going on, right? Thousands of years ago was China being very strong in silk production, and now China is trying to catch up, basically.
Yeah, I think, Lucian, that's the part of development, right? So countries around China, like India, like Pakistan, they have production of silk. And the textile, we always need to remember, the textile industry is one of the first industries to get all over the world. So the experience of China and India went to Europe, from Europe went to Latin America, and that's how the global world is formed. So nowadays we have in this traditional industry, as we see the presentation of the professor, technology, and especially intelligent technology is shaping the new textile and apparel manufacturing. So you ask the old, I would say, masters of tailoring clothes, they exist? No, they are not existing anymore. So you have a new professional. So for example, before when we make clothes, we used to cut the clothes with a scissor and by hand. Now you use laser and you use software to cut the clothes. So I think this is the evolution of a new trend for especially a traditional industries as apparel and textile. So that's a very positive, and I need to remember China is still #1 in textile and apparel industry in the world.
Okay, thank you for the encouragement. We're very happy to hear that. Thank you very much. I'm sure with the hard work of Chinese people here, we will be able to, at least stay neck to neck. Professor Ning, just now we were talking about, cultural exchange, art, and you were talking about conflicts, right? You wanted to talk a little bit about that. Is this one of the conflicts we're looking at today? I mean, the competition in the world today about silk or other traditional Chinese crafts, which are actually done better by other people than the Chinese.
Oh, of course. I think throughout the history, we say people are better making this kind of thing or that kind of thing. I think it's not the point. The point is silk maker. It's people, right? We not only talk about the technology. Technology is made for the people. So we are talking about people who need it and people who make it. So I want to make a final remark here. It's a Tang Dynasty poem. A final line is talking about the people. 采桑女, the mulberry picking girl. And then the final line said it's 愁听门外吹里絮, 官家2月收新丝. So I was anxious to hear that the local officer is calling. The authority will collect new silk in February. So it talks about the hardship the silk makers endure in the Tang Dynasty. In fact, actually in the Tang Dynasty, Chinese silk making is the strongest on the world. That is one side of a success or a loss of a country. But behind it, it's the people who make it. It's the people who lead it. And it's the same thing inside China or outside China, in the East and in the West. So our attention will not only pay to the technology like silk itself, but also people who enjoy, who create the technology itself.
Ambassador Nushirvan, I want to get your reaction. Any above-mentioned points that you want to follow up with, especially the people who are using it, the people who are needing it, and the hard work that's put behind producing the trade that are keeping country flourishing, interconnected, and peaceful with each other?
Thank you again. I think we can all agree that competition is a feature of our lives now. It's a question of what kind of competition that we're looking at. Certainly, at the end of the day, competition makes us better. The general welfare of humanity as a whole tends to rise as compared to a situation where there is no competition whatsoever. Were it not for competition, I don't think we would be advanced in terms of civilization as we are right now. We'll probably be living in caves, I don't know. But the important thing is to have to be clear about what kind of competition that we're looking at. And I think Mr. Varoufakis talked very passionately about this issue just now. I think Professor Ning also mentioned it, although in a different context. And, I've always thought that when we talk about competition and ensuring that it does not lead to outright conflict, we should think about the notion of appropriateness, which is to put things in its right place. And in this context, there is a Malay proverb which relates to the use of silk, and it says that in Malay it goes seperti sapu diikat kain benang, and this is loosely translated as, you use a silk thread to tie a broom, and it shows inappropriateness.
To tie a broom?
To use silk thread to tie a broom, because the broom is a very humble product, isn't it? So it's and you use a silk thread to tie it together, and this illustrates a notion of inappropriateness.
I see.
And the notion that I'm trying to forward is, in order for us to ensure that competition does not lead to conflict, we have to think about the notion of appropriateness, that it does not lead to something over and above what we intended for in the very beginning.
I get your message.
We need to think about these kind of issues very carefully. And I thought that I'd just throw in that proverb, which is related to the word silk, since we're talking about silk.
Yeah, how interesting. In China, we use silk to tie books in ancient times. For instance,
very appropriate.
Yeah, very appropriate. That's very appropriate. And then I understand Professor Hu, very briefly, she brought us actually a book that was printed on silk.
Yes.
I understand it's
the
Analects of
Confucius.
Confucius,
yes. Yeah. I've brought this small item to share with all the friends here, because I believe this is a very interesting combination of material and culture.
Material and culture,
yeah,
okay.
So silk becomes some carrier of philosophy from Confucius. So we can see it's the complete analect
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
It's a
starts
complete-
from here.
Yeah,
That's
it's a complete intellect.
Yeah, that's Confucius'
Yes.
portrait.
So, of course, people daily, they do not read books like this because it's too delicate. But this shows how people treasure silk as a very important container of their culture.
Yeah. Basically, it's interesting because Confucianism is a lot about what to do, what not to do.
Yes, yes.
It's about how you become appropriate, how you behave, how you live in an appropriate way in the right context. I'm going to ask Professor Huang Renwei to wrap up because silk really starts from a material, but it's much more than material, as we have discussed. In Chinese, there is so much more to be said about silk, but it also comes with emotions. It is a metaphor. For instance, again, in Malaysia, you don't use silk to bind a broom. In China, silk also means you miss someone, right? Because silk is the same pronunciation as think. Silk can mean homeland, homesickness, or love. So how is silk shaping the Chinese character a little bit so that we can use this to help understand each other better?
Silk is history as long as Chinese culture. Silk is some kind of feeling.
Feeling.
Some kind of feeling we express in the poem, in the literature. One word almost everyone knows called 春蚕到死丝方尽. That means spring silkworm silking until its life to the end.
So spring silkworms spin silk until its life ends, meaning dedication.
Yeah, working hard and hard without to think of its death coming. So it becomes some kind of spirit, some kind of high quality of the moral of Chinese people.
Yeah.
And also, it's also some kind of feeling of love. You see, people say the lotus root broken, but the silk still connected.
The lotus roots are broken, but the silk still connected. Yeah.
So some lovers separated, but still think of each other.
Yeah.
That is the silk.
That is the silk.
And also, people use it to describe the music. The music as fluent as silk.
Yeah, we have actually prepared some music from South China, maybe for people to get an idea. Actually, here in this part of the country, string and percussion flutes are called silk and bamboo.
Yeah, silk and bamboo is Jiangnan music.
Jiangnan music, South China music.
Yeah.
That's what we're hearing now.
East China. So, silk is diligent, hardworking. Silk is loving, is feeling.
Yeah.
Silk is music, is painting. Everything.
Everything. Lovely. So we don't have unlimited time. I hope everybody has enjoyed this silky session. We do want to give one opportunity for a question from one of our audience members, if there is any. Okay, there is a young lad there. We want to hear what is your perspective, your question, please.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
and to whom you want to address this question? 这个问题想提给谁？好，谢谢。
Anyone of you.
Anyone.
Yeah.
Okay.
After hearing you conversation.
Louder, please. Louder. Don't be so silky. Your voice doesn't.
Hello.
Okay. 好，继续说吧。您的声音大点。
After hearing you conversation.
用那个，
After hearing your conversations, to some extent, I think the silk is kind of similar to Chinese people in some way, because we both have soft and tough or strong part of our personality.
Okay.
And as you mentioned earlier about our culture and their relationships. So actually, I want to ask if you can choose one thing to represent people in your country, like flowers or anything that have special meanings, what's the first word you can think of?
Okay.
And or is there any like unique qualities or characters you hope your people to show to others when they communicating with the people all over the world?
Okay, very good question. How about this? If we are not so bored, let's give our 3 international friends each one sentence. How about that? Mr. Madaro, for Italy, what would you use to describe your people, your culture, a flower or something? And then Professor Teixeira, and last but not least, Ambassador Nushirwan. Mr. Madaro.
Yes, silk for Italian people is connecting directly with China.
What
when
about,
we think to...
Yeah, not to talk about, doesn't have to be silk again. What would you pick to describe Italy? A flower or something else? One thing. What would you pick?
I think a flower.
A flower. Which flower?
Yeah. Hibiscus. Hibiscus in Italy, yes, from a long time we call China the country of hibiscus. It's one poetic name of China.
Oh, okay.
So,
hibiscus.
Also we have...
是不是玉兰？我觉得 hibiscus 是不是玉兰？ hibiscus in Chinese 叫玉兰花。 Somebody, please help me check that. we need a batonologist there. Anyway, hibiscus is your answer. Thank you, Mr. Madaro. Professor Teixeira for Brazil.
I wrote this book.
Okay.
You see, I wrote this book. It means understand China. My last page of this book is the country of hibiscus.
The country of hibiscus. Okay. Okay. We'll find that out. We'll find that and to see whether my English vocabulary is big enough. Professor Teixeira.
I think I use 2 words to describe Brazil: energy and joy. We are well known in the world to be a joyful people, a happy people. Energy is part of our attitude.
Okay.
So if I need to find, I would say a figure to represent Brazil would be the sun.
The sun. 太阳.
Yes.
The sun. Good on you.
Yes.
I like that. There's only one sun. Can we use that as well? Finally, Ambassador Nushirwan.
Thank you. It would be food, and a specific kind of food. We have in Malaysia a dish called the rojak. It's rojak. Rojak. It's basically fruits and crisps, and covered with a sweet sauce with peanuts. Okay. And we are a multicultural country, and each ingredient of the rojak makes the dish taste better, and it doesn't lose its own identity.
Rojak.
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 Look it up.
Yeah.
R-O-J-K.
R-O-J-E. I will look it up, and I will make sure that when I go to Malaysia next time, I will try it out.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got my curiosity up. Well, time is very limited. Before we know it, it's been 1.5 hours. It's been such a joy for me. I don't know whether for you. We lost the guest. I guess he made his point, but I'm sure he'll be back on my show sometime. Thank you so much to all my guests online and offline, and thanks infinitely to all of you who have been following us on Facebook, Twitter, Weibo, Weixin. I'm not able to see any comments. I promise you next time, if I'm able to see the comments, I will react to your comments or questions. Thank you so much. Have a good remainder of your day. Bye-bye. Thank you.